Hey guys, what's going on? So I just wanted to cover the life of Leia Organa, later known as Leia Organa Solo, and then her biological name, Leia Skywalker. So I just wanted to cover a lot of different points along her life, in addition to just my thoughts on her character overall, and then I'm going to also touch on some future project opportunities. And this is going to be mostly following canon, but I am including some Legends material here as well. So starting off, we know that Leia was born the exact same time as Luke, with both of them being twins in Revenge of the Sith. So they, of course, would be the same age across Star Wars. And we know that they were both separated at birth. This was really to put both of them into hiding. You have Kenobi and Yoda being really concerned of not really just Vader ever finding out about them, but also the Emperor was their main concern. So that's why you have Luke being taken to Tatooine, but you have Senator Organa being present for her birth and also in their discussion. So he volunteered to take care of her, which is where we see her being taken to Alderaan. And then her mother would be the Queen of Alderaan. And then we see her really growing up into royalty, pretty much living in what would be the equivalent of a castle in Alderaan. Some of the first glimpses that we see of her is around age 9. And this is really where she starts to frequently run away from her home. And whether or not she was just mad about some little thing that was going on or just wanted a little bit more freedom, she really would like to stay in the woods nearby, really enjoyed the wilderness just to get out a little bit. And we see this really coming back to hurt her in Kenobi. So she would be age 10 during this, and that's where we see her getting kidnapped during one of these little stints where she just kind of is hanging out outside. But then we again get Kenobi rescuing her and them kind of going on a little bit of an adventure together. But we see her reunited with her family at the end of that. And then really just leading into her teenage years, you have several other family members, mostly including aunts who would kind of show her a lot of the different proper etiquette and manners in terms of being raised in a big royal family. Really, she would spend most of her time with them instead of friends of her own age. And then we see her going into age 14. This is when she starts to shadow her father, follows him along, and gets to know a lot of his different political duties, being the senator of Alderaan. And she would also undergo the equivalent of what would be a student internship at this time with the legislator. And then we also see her at 15 and 16. This is really where she starts training in self-defense since she is a public figure. So she would do a lot of combat training. That's where we see her starting to train with a pistol or a blaster, in addition to several martial arts training. And then when she turned 16, she would now be officially able to be crowned as the Princess of Alderaan following her adopted mother. And we see her taking several trips in this role, also continuing to shadow her father. And this is really where she first learns that he is secretly starting a rebellion against the Empire. And then the year following that, that's where she would run for office and got elected in as the senator of Alderaan to replace her father. So that's where her political journey begins there. And then going into 18, she would continue to not only serve in holding office, but also would work more and more with her father in building the rebellion. And then we really start to see her leading into the original trilogy. We get just before this, we get a little glimpse of her at the end of Rogue One with the de-aging technology. And that's where she gets handed the blueprints to the Death Star just before escaping Vader. But this really wouldn't last for very long, as you have the Empire tracking down her ship and then being taken into captivity at the beginning of the movie. But just before this, we see her giving the plans to R2-D2 before R2 along with C-3PO would go into an escape pod to Tatooine. And that's really where we get the start of the main storyline. You have Luke, and then later showing Kenobi the message which she recorded into R2, and this propels them into a rescue mission. And I think what's really important, not only to the Star Wars timeline, but also to Leia's story overall, is that you have Vader and Tarkin questioning her at the beginning for the whereabouts on the secret Rebel Alliance base. And when she refuses to give this up, they end up using the Death Star to destroy her home planet, Alderaan. So both of her parents would be killed in this. And this is really what furthers her motivations of defeating the Empire in the end. So then later in the movie, you have, along with her leadership, Luke and the X-Wing pilots blowing up the Death Star, and then following her father's passage, she would become the more official leader of the rebellion. And then we next see her in Empire Strikes Back. She would be 22 like Luke, and we see the rebels having a new base on Hoth, and the Empire soon learning about that, but we really see her growing relationship with Han Solo here. And then you have him getting freezed at the end of the movie. In Return of the Jedi, she would be 23. We see Leia trying to save Han, but they don't get very far, getting captured by Jabba, and then you have Luke coming to help them out and free both of them. And then, of course, later in the movie, we have the rebellion eventually defeating the Empire, and this is also where Leia would learn the truth about her biological parents from Luke. And then just following the last movie in the trilogy here, we get her at age 24, just a year after. And this is where she would get married to Han Solo. She would also start her Jedi training with Luke, and this would really occur just until giving birth to Ben Solo, which would be her only kid in canon. And then following this, just really pivoting into Legends, you have her also around the same age at 24, and then leading into her 30s, we have her really establishing the New Republic, which would basically just be reestablishing a democratic rule following the former democracy being overthrown by the Empire, or really the Emperor and Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. And here you still have little small reemergences of the Empire, but never to really what it was before. Although you probably have the most pressure being led by Grand Admiral Thrawn, but we know, of course, that the New Republic is able to maintain its rule and periodically hold them off. So you have several plot points here, even more of the more far-fetched ones, such as the Palpatine clones or the evil Luke clones and stuff like that that they have to deal with. And then also for Leia going more into her 30s at this point, you have her birthing twins. This would be Jason and Jaina Solo. And then later, which would be Anakin Solo, all three of which are trained by Luke. So through her 30s and even her 40s, you see Leia being not only a mother, but the chief of state to the New Republic, which she really helped found in the first place. In addition to really undergoing her Jedi training at this point, we see her often wielding a lightsaber and fighting on the front lines. And really going into her 40s and 50s is when she would perfect her training and when she would officially become a Jedi Knight. So that's really her story for the most part in what would be known as the Dark Empire period. And then we see her again on the big screen in The Force Awakens. She would be 53 years old at this time. And we see her continuing to lead now, which would be the Resistance. And you have them fighting against the First Order, which overthrew the New Republic. We also see her reuniting with Han Solo here. And then in The Last Jedi, we get more of a development in seeing her as a general. And then in Rise of Skywalker, that would just be a year after, she would be 54. And then eventually her passing after calling out to her son, Ben Solo, which really triggers him to turn back to the light side of the Force. And that's really where Leia's story would end. And now just some thoughts on her character overall. I think what's really great about Leia is her diverse abilities. And this is all being brought out in her actions, whether it's as a politician, not only being the leader, but leading a successful rebellion, in addition to also being a great warrior on the battlefield, whether it's just early on with a pistol or even later into her Jedi training. So I think you have a lot of great depth there. And in terms of her inspiration and creation, I think you really have a lot of neat additions that went into developing her story. This could be traced back to Lady Guinevere, or the Queen of King Arthur, to more medieval times, to just several other princesses in general, whether in real life or in fiction. And then not only that, but Leia's relationship to Luke really being the main motivator of him in Return of the Jedi to defeat Vader, because you have those lines in there of Vader saying that if Luke won't turn to the dark side, then perhaps his twin sister Leia would, after he is able to sense her in that encounter. And then you even have the iconic hairstyle being described as George being what he really got inspired from the Mexican Rebellion or the Soldierderas, or a lot of the women who aided and fought in the revolution. So you have a lot of their hairstyles there, really going into what we see with Leia and even later Padme in the prequels. And then in addition to that, you have a lot of heavy inspiration from the Shield Maidens in Viking or Norse history. And you even have the term Shield Maiden being referenced specifically in different comics. And then you even likely have other inspirations for the name both Luke and Leia being connected to Italian, where you have Louis being in reference to him, and Leia being in reference to her, even though you also have Luke just being short for Lucas or George Lucas. So I think you have a lot of different elements there that really combine to the creation of Leia. And in terms of future projects, I think you have just really a great opportunity to cover her life in her later 20s, 30s, 40s, and even earlier 50s before The Force Awakens, because we already see her as a prominent leader, but we really don't get too much development for her as a Jedi besides just that brief training sequence. So it would really be neat to see her fighting as a Jedi and really becoming a prominent Force user. And you even have the original plans for the sequels being described by George Lucas of having Leia being the new chosen one, really being the focus of the 3 movies he wanted to do after Return of the Jedi. And of course, I think you get a little bit of a seed planted for this, a little hint of this with Yoda's lines describing to Kenobi that there is another. So I really think you have a lot to do with Leia, and her character can still be evolved to really fill in that period. And I'm really interested to see if more is being done with her in the future. So feel free to let me know any of your thoughts on this. Really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you later.